Let's begin. Thank you all very much for coming. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I know that we have participants from all over the world. This is a very interesting, important topic to, I think, all of us. If you're here, you're probably here because you're committed to stimulating private sector investment and trade for the development of least developed countries. I think the majority of participants that I'm aware of are investment promotion agencies and their governments. So we're all facing the same question about what to do in the face of the pandemic. Of course, the novel coronavirus has first and foremost poses a health risk to all of us. It's straining the capacities of our healthcare systems to limit the spread and mitigate the effects. So first, let me say on behalf of the Enhanced Integrated Framework and the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies, our hosts, welcome, and we hope that you join us safely and in good health. But of course, we're here to speak about something narrower, about the effects of the pandemic on business, right? And our ability to attract business to our countries, to leverage that business for development. We've heard plenty in the news about the macro level effects, FDI going down, supply disruptions, demand disruptions, people changing the way they consume, and of course that influences our activities, our policies. But what do we do on the operational level, right? If we're all here as investment promoters, what do we do at the project level to manage these risks and opportunities? How are individual investors behaving? What are the biggest risks of disinvestment? And on the other side, are there actually some opportunities coming out of the situation for us as investment promoters? And being aware of these risks and opportunities, what do we do to manage them? What are the practices, the policies, the tools that we can use to help at-risk investors and to keep going out and getting new investors? And in this whole enterprise, who's out there to help us? What are the resources? Who are the partners that are actively supporting us in these efforts? So these are the three big questions I think that we're all facing, and which our distinguished panelists are going to help us try to answer today. I think we really are fortunate to have this particular combination of panelists collectively. They represent the public and private sector. They're leaders of apex institutions for private sector development through investment and trade. They're leaders of individual Ipas and the international institutions that are meant to consolidate best practices and to focus technical assistance. So I don't want to spend too much time talking myself. You're not here to hear me. So let me introduce our panelists. We have 5 panelists and a distinguished discussant who will speak at the end of the panel before we open up to questions and answers. So our first panelist is Dr. Ratnakar Adhikari, and he is the Executive Director of the Executive Secretariat of the Enhanced Integrated Framework, which is an initiative launched under the auspices of the WTO. It's a partnership of 51 countries, 24 donors, and 8 partner agencies working for private sector investment and trade as an engine for development and poverty reduction. Dr. Adhikari has more than 30 years of experience in the private sector, government, intergovernment, NGOs, and academia. Before joining the EIF, he was the Chief Executive Director of a Kathmandu-based regional think tank for trade, economics, and environment. He's also served as the Senior Advisor to the National Planning Commission of Nepal, a UNDP specialist for the Asia-Pacific region, and a visiting professor at the Midwestern University in Nepal. His work has included extensive research and publication in the areas of international trade, investment promotion, regional economic integration, aid for trade, and competition policy, particularly from the perspective of LDCs. Mr. Bostjan Skalar is our second panelist. He is the Executive Director and CEO of WAIPA, the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies. WAIPA is the global umbrella organization for investment promotion agencies, or Ipas, as we will refer to them throughout most of this conversation. WAIPA was established in 1995 in Geneva under the auspices of the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development, or UNCTAD. Before joining WAIPA, Mr. Skalar was the director of the Slovenian Public Agency for Promotion of Investment, Internationalization, Entrepreneurship, and Tourism, also known as SPIRIT. He was the founding director who merged 3 different organizations' portfolios to combine this one. SPIRIT was and still is successful in attracting, facilitating, and expanding FDI, or foreign direct investment, as we will be discussing today. Mr. Skalar has also served 4 years as a Slovenian Counsel for Economic Affairs in Istanbul, and many years in the private sector, where he was in charge of international business and market development for textile, automotive, printing, and construction firms. Third, we have Ms. Dorothy Tembo. She is the Executive Director ad interim of the International Trade Center and was its Deputy Director since 2014. ITC, for those of you that don't know, is the only development agency that is fully dedicated to supporting the internationalization of SMEs. And so its work involves strengthening the integration of the business sector of developing countries into the global economy, improving the performance of trade and investment support institutions for the benefit of SMEs, and improving the international competitiveness of SMEs. Before joining ITC, Ms. Tembo also served as Executive Director of the EIF. She was Chief Trade Negotiator and Director of Foreign Trade in the Zambian Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry, and she was a Trade and Investment Advisor to USAID in implementing the Trade Protocol for SADC, the South African Development Community. Also on our panel is Ms. Sandra D'Amico. She's the founder and managing director of HR Inc. She is also vice president of the Cambodian Federation of Employers and Business Associations. HR Inc. manages tens of thousands of job vacancies for thousands of employers in Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and other countries in the ASEAN region. And they've been doing so for over a decade. With more than 100 full-time professional staff, HR Inc. services global corporations, companies, and regional conglomerates, as well as SMEs and emerging entrepreneurs. In addition to that, they will also provide the same services to governments and donors in the not-for-profit sector. And fifth, we have Mr. Moussa Ismaila Touré, who is the managing director of API Mali. So I'm glad that we have an investment promotion agency represented on the panel. Mr. Moussa has over 22 years of experience in investments, management, operations, and successful entrepreneurship across West and Central Africa. He joined API Mali since 2015 to redesign it and set up new strategies to promote investment and entrepreneurship. Mr. Moussa is also active through other organizations in private sector development and the empowerment of youth and women. He is vice president of RIAFPI, the International Network of Francophone Investment Promotion Agencies, and a member of Include, the knowledge platform on inclusive development policies. Before joining API Mali, Mr. Moussa was Coca-Cola's chief accountant and logistics manager for Shell in Mali, and during his time at Coca-Cola, he was recognized as their values champion within the 37 countries of their Central East-West Africa business unit. So indeed, we have a great panel with a diversity of experience who have unique perspectives on the state of investment opportunities for LDCs. And so I'm very excited to bring them together. Before I throw out the first question to our panel, I just want to let everybody know how this is going to flow. The idea is that this is a discussion. So the panelists, I will pose questions, but the panelists will feel free to interject when they hear something come up on which they have some additional insights to contribute. And we'll do that for about an hour. Then we will have the remarks by the distinguished minister from Cambodia. And then we'll move into a final 30 minutes of questions and answers, during which all of you may pose questions. I encourage you to. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So I hope you'll use that to submit questions. You can do that at any time. You don't have to wait. There are a lot of you, so I apologize in advance if we don't get to all of your questions, but we'll certainly get through many. Okay, so great. I'd like to start with you, Dr. Adhikari. Even in normal times, LDCs struggle to stimulate business investment, right? They often find themselves in a vicious cycle wherein they can't attract FDI that they feel they need to build up infrastructure, skills, and support services. But at the same time, they don't have the infrastructure, skills, and support services to attract FDI. So I can only imagine that the current situation is aggravating this. How do you see the pandemic affecting the relative ability of LDCs to compete with all the other countries in the world for FDI? Is it getting harder? Is it getting easier? And what are the factors that play into that?
Oh, thank you, Carlos. And I am also pleased to welcome all the participants as well as panelists to this event as a co-organizer, and also pleased to partner with WAIPA. So let me start with challenges. Of course, pandemic has compounded already existing vulnerabilities of LDCs, which is clear. But I just want to point out three critical challenges, and these are also highlighted in the UNCTAD World Investment Report 2020. So let me start with the health-related vulnerabilities. It was actually, we anticipated that there would be a massive impact, but this has not panned out in the sense that three countries account for 70% of total active cases, and these are Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Nepal. In other cases, curve is flattening, so it might not be as bad as expected, but there are definitely certain sectors that are going to be affected, starting with extractive sector because of commodity price fall even prior to pandemic, infrastructure because of the risk of conducting activities, tourism because of the risk of travel and continued travel restriction, and export-oriented industries will also be affected because of slackening demand at the global level. There's a second challenge which is already visible, which was already visible in 2019 because of reduction in the announced greenfield investment, and which has actually accelerated in 2020. If you see the first quarter data, you will see that the investment announcement in relation to greenfield investment have reduced by 20% in terms of value and 27% in terms of number. And this is a huge drastic reduction, but at the same time, there are a few exceptions that we can discuss later. Then the third challenge is the reduced retained earnings of multinational enterprises who can reinvest the earning in the country, in the host country. So, but then, you know, this may not affect all the LDCs alike, but few countries which have, you know, close to a quarter or even higher percentage of retained earning in the form of foreign direct investment, including Cambodia, Mali, Rwanda, and Burkina Faso, and more importantly, Togo, where the retained earning constitute more than 80% of foreign direct investment. So these are the challenges. But there are opportunities as well in the spirit of not wasting the crisis. And I also say that inaction is probably not an option. So in that spirit, if you look at the opportunities, there are several opportunities. The first and foremost is to deepen participation in the global value chain. Because of supply chain disruption, now companies are, you know, trying to reestablish their presence in a diversity of location, and countries such as Vietnam, India, Indonesia have already taken advantage of this opportunity. This opportunity can be exploited by LDCs, you know, particularly those that already have a special economic zone. In a special economic zone, you don't have that much of logistic or infrastructure related challenges. So these countries, you know, I can list them. You know, in Asia, you have Bangladesh, Cambodia, Myanmar, which already have a special economic zone or industrial park. Nepal is another example in Asia. But in Africa, you have countries such as Ethiopia, Senegal, and Rwanda who are leaders among LDC in establishing special economic zone. So that's one area. But then there are policies also that can help accelerate the flow of attracting foreign direct investment, as done in Myanmar, for example, which have introduced a fast tracking of investment approval, which has actually provided an opportunity for the country. Similarly, in Benin, they have introduced an e-registration system, as a result of which during the pandemic period, more than 6,000 businesses have been registered. So these are a few policy related examples. The second opportunity that I see is to tap into sustainable FDI opportunities. There are 60 fast growing opportunities valued 12 trillion, and which is close to 8% of the global GDP. And the countries that are moving towards green recovery post-pandemic, they would be in a position to utilize this opportunity. And few countries that have already done so, even prior to pandemic, are Rwanda and Ethiopia, which have either provided fiscal incentive for attracting investment in green sectors, or established industrial parks that are completely focused on 100% renewable energy. So these examples can be replicated or scaled up. And the final one is to tap into new sources of growth. LDCs, some of the LDCs are defying the new, defying the old linear growth model, and they are moving to new sectors such as ICT and e-commerce or digital trade sector. A few countries, if you look at the share of their ICT export as a share of their total export, countries such as Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Burkina Faso, Nepal, and Senegal, these LDCs have a share which is higher than the 11%, which is the global share. And they have been utilizing this opportunity. Maybe other LDCs can also utilize this opportunity, particularly in the context of the pandemic, where ICT business is it can be organized and managed with limited social contacts. I'll stop there and probably come back later to explain better a few examples. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, so I think I took away a couple of I think crucial points from that in terms of what's actionable for our audience. One, there's a sector difference, right? I mean, you identified the challenges which get the most attention. We have tourism, commodity prices hurting the extractive sectors, but on the other side of it, ICT, for example, this is a boom time for ICT, right? The world is moving towards ICT, and it may never move back, right? This has been an ideal we've had for a long time. I think all of us here have probably flown millions of miles, leaving long, big carbon emissions, all the time saying we need to stop doing this, we need to do less of it. And this is forcing us into a world where we're moving towards more ICT, greener economies. I'm grateful for the examples you gave there of specific policies that certain governments are taking to advance the green economy at this time. And you also, I'm glad you talked about inaction not being an option, right? It's happening, but we have to react. We can't not do anything. And the policies you laid out, I think, are some great tips for LDCs, especially making use of SEZs, for example, taking advantage of trends and diversifying locations to seize the moment and go out and invest, promote investment to take advantage of the crisis, right? To not waste the crisis, as you said. So, Bostjan, on that topic of investment promotion agencies being active, going out and changing the way they do things, I'd like to hear what I think our audience would like to hear what you're hearing from your members. For those that don't know, WAIPA counts 126 national and subnational investment promotion agencies among its members, including 20 from LDCs. So I imagine they're talking to you about upticks in disinvestment. Maybe they're seeing a difference in the number and types of investment leads that they're seeing, and whether those investors are doing site selection and due diligence in a different way than they used to. So if you could share some thoughts on that, we'd be grateful.
Sure, thank you very much. First of all, also from the WAIPA side, it's a pleasure to work with EIF, and especially I'm glad to have Ratnakar with us. He's always very insightful. Actually, it was a difficult situation, and I don't think I need to say that it's especially difficult situation for the most vulnerable ones, for the LDC ones. But you would be surprised that when we do our surveys, you see as well that the developed IPAs face similar challenges, actually. who was actually prepared to be under this kind of threat of the global pandemic, and all the flights are cut, all the, let's say, normal connections are cut with investors, global value chains are disrupted. So of course, we as WAIPA, we see globally a big disruption, and seeing the numbers that it looks like it will, the global FDI will go below 1 trillion, which is, I would say, extraordinary low number, which will impact onto the global economy. And saying this, the global economy is in the decrease, the GDP is in the decrease, so the governments are having a big difficulties how to finance this, how to create some certain incentive programs for the, let's say, local companies, which are of course also the foreign direct investors, how to help them to, let's say, overcome this crisis, how to help them, let's say, prevail the unemployment to go beyond some reasonable, let's say, numbers. So this means that there are a lot of budgetary issues, and the IPAs, of course, are under, let's say, the same story, because they are the body which is working on one side to assist governments, and on the other side, of course, assisting the investors. So we even made a short survey, and we saw that IPAs, although one of the most crucial bodies, again, I would say, and more than ever needed to overcome this global crisis, they are actually, of course, under the threat of some administrative threats, like budgetary cuts, more than 50%, some loss of authority, even some potential shutdowns, which, of course, the main task is to give the message to the global community that IPAs are more than ever needed, and they are the one who will play a crucial role to bring their economies out of these bad times. So what we see is they are focusing, of course, especially currently, they are focusing on the aftercare activities, or if you call it investment facilitation, trying to assist the, let's say, current investors in their own countries to overcome the crisis, giving them, providing them especially clear information, providing them information that their governments prepared, let's say, to tackle this crisis. They are focusing on digitalization, if they are able, as Ratnakar as well said. So whatever they are able, they are trying to use this opportunity to use webinars like we are just currently doing. Everything is going digital. So nothing is not anymore as the old style. And then there are no travels. So as you mentioned, for example, site selection issues, of course, I would say it's not everywhere the same. Not everyone has the same rules, regulations, let's say infrastructure to be able to make, I don't know, virtual site selection visits, at least to be as a preparation for the post-COVID era, that investors at least are able to see the locations, to be able afterwards with potential visits again to decide, to make decisions. Sectors, as Ratnakar as well mentioned, some of them benefited. Of course, health sector benefited, and pharmaceuticals, for example. There are some emerging sectors, artificial intelligence, let's say ICT. So these are all big opportunities also for the LDCs to tackle on and to actually develop some certain skills. Let's say we all know that energy, automobile, and anything related to tourism was hardly hit. And many of the countries are, of course, very much tourism oriented. And then they are facing big difficulties. So it means like the IPAs need to revisit their strategies. They need to try to make it more lean organization. So being more, let's say, cost efficient. They might need to focus on the new sectors. So they are facing the issues that they don't have the people. We all know that IPAs try to have a sector specialists. So as the new sectors are approaching, they are emerging, they don't have the proper sector specialists. So extremely important is the capacity buildings. Extremely important is that they maybe reprioritize the sectors. They create a new value proposition for investors. So what will be the most important for the current investors, let's say, to keep there, make, so to retain in their own in their countries, and potentially think to reinvest, because we all know that currently, as Ratnakar mentioned, for example, greenfield investments and the new investments are on a hold now. Even there is money, but of course, due to the uncertain circumstances, the investors are keeping the money by themselves. They do not want to make, let's say, strategic decisions. So the ones who are in the, let's say, host country are the one who might be more than willing, let's say, to reinvest or to expand their activities there. So I would say this is, I would stop here and I would say this is what we see currently. But as we all know, there might be already a second wave of the COVID, so no one knows what will be. So there will be a need to create maybe a new, to expand the FDI cake, creating new opportunities, instead of just focusing on the current and of course adjusting to the new normal. Thank you for now.
Yeah, thank you. That big uncertainty is possibly the biggest impact, right? We can deal with known problems, but not knowing what comes next, it really sort of stifles or paralyzes business in some cases. So I think that's a great point that you made about hanging on to what we have, right? Making sure that the investors are there, survive and come out stronger and reinvest. So that's great. You also mentioned that IPAs are needed now more than ever to do just that, to keep them. And it reminds me of the experience of the IPA of Ireland, Industrial Development Authority of Ireland, after the financial crisis in 2008, where the government froze budgets across the government. No ministries got an increase, except for one, which was IDA Ireland, because they knew that that was going to lead them out, that was an investment in the government was making in growth. So I think that's a great point that you make. You also talk about the skills needed to take advantage of the opportunities, right? So when you mentioned things like AI, I think a lot of people immediately think AI, LDCs, well, that's not going to happen, right? Without looking at what it means in detail, it's governments, companies adopting the latest technology, some of which are more productive than the last generation or the generation before, right? It's about getting more efficient and taking the next step of development naturally. And so we do need the skills for those things. So I think that's also a great segue to our next speaker. Ms. Tembo from ITC. Of course, ITC does tremendous work with SMEs. It has its competitiveness survey, which probably gives us a lot of good insights about what's happening to small and medium-sized companies and LDCs right now. And of course, they provide a lot of technical assistance. They develop strategies, recommend policies to governments on how to support these SMEs. So I think it would be great to hear what you think governments should be doing at this time, what your survey is showing us, and how ITC is responding to the changing client needs in this environment. So please, Ms. Tembo.
And thank you very much, Carlos. Let me start by giving my thanks to the EIF and indeed WAIPA for organizing this important event. It's great for us to be part of this conversation this morning, this afternoon, from whichever part of the world you are in. As has rightly been pointed out, very unprecedented times or crisis that we have before us, both from a health perspective, but more so from the economic side as well. We really have seen the challenges that not only all of us are being confronted with, but more so with the micro, small, and medium enterprises who are facing very, very difficult times. The situation has definitely changed the way they produce, the way we all consume, and indeed the way we are trading. And it is one that warrants that, as others have said before me, that we have some reflection on this and working together with the different countries, that we find innovative ways of ensuring that we remain relevant in the current situation, but more importantly, that we are providing appropriate and concrete solutions that assist the businesses to be able to sustain themselves, but more importantly, looking at the medium and long-term perspective, that we are also indeed repositioning them for growth. So this is the situation that we have established from the surveys that we have conducted across 110 countries, and asking or seeking a response from over 1,200 businesses. It has become very clear to us that MSMEs are very much in very challenging times, and I think it confirms much of what has been said. In particular, that survey has shown us that 60% of the business of the micro, small, and medium enterprises are strongly affected by the crisis. And this is, if you compare this with the larger companies, that percentage is at 42%. 1/5 of these small and medium enterprises are really at risk of bankruptcy, with 21 reporting expected closures within a period of 3 to 6 months from June, the June month that we had conducted this survey. Again, this compares 10% with the larger firms. Obviously, there's a lot that is going on now. Just with for companies to be able to have a very good understanding of what is confronting them has been a challenge in itself. Information flow is one that has been difficult to access, and indeed, when it comes to situations where governments have been in a position to actually be able to provide some support to these firms, that also has been difficult to know in the first place. But more challenging has been, some of the requirements that are still going with some of the stimulant packages that are being offered by some of the countries. So it is a situation that is really one that warrants that we ensure that we are moving forward in terms of ensuring that we are supporting. What is it that has been the impact of all this? Of course, we all know disastrous. Disastrous in the sense that we have not only lost lives, arising out of a very devastating virus that is confronting all of us, but I think the huge impact also on the economic side. And here it is one, as has already been said, I think by Ratnakar, that it affects not only the supply side, but it's also affecting the demand side. Trade has completely been disrupted through the lockdowns that have been put in place, and put in place coming from a very good perspective, but clearly it is one that is posing challenges because you cannot have the traditional movement of goods, which we have all been able to, or most of these have been able to utilize at this point. What we have established from the SME competitiveness report, which is our flagship report that we produce annually, and this year it was focused on COVID-19 implications. It has actually given us a good sense of what some of that impact might be. 3 hubs that I want to speak to: China, EU, and the US. Just those 3, we have established that there is a potential loss amounting to $126 billion just this year. We are not even thinking about beyond. Second point, which is also what was alluded to, is the fact that we all know that from the WTO report that trade is likely to fall between 12 to 32%. UNCTAD, as was said before, again, FDI might fall by 40%, and GDP, again, as was said, 3%, as IMF has informed us. I think given this scenario, it's imperative that the recovery efforts are not only putting MSMEs at the center, but alongside that we are really consolidating our efforts to ensure that the FDI and IPAs are also an integral part of this process. It's really not an option. I don't see a recovery process that would be very responsive in the absence of dealing with this second aspect, because indeed we know from history that, you know, the FDI and indeed the IPA side of these things have been very catalytical, particularly in the development process of developing countries. So that has to remain an integral part of that. We also need to ensure that we continue or we double our efforts in as far as ensuring that we have countries ensuring that they have an enabling environment that continues to facilitate and attract investment. In the absence of that, the investment is not going to come. In any case, for most of these countries, they too are being confronted with various situations that are very demanding because they have been affected by the same situation. So making that decision for them to move from their countries to be able to invest in any of the countries that we work with has to be one that offers some assurances around the security of the investment that is to come. But linked to that, it also remains, I think, fundamentally important, despite the huge challenges that countries have, that the domestic investment side of things is also one that is actually being addressed. So these are the issues that we need to make sure that we are moving forward on in terms of ensuring that that enabling environment is there. We need to continue working towards eliminating all the bureaucratic and indeed procedural impediments. And it's really not an option for me. It has to happen. Otherwise, there's a huge risk there. What is it that ITC is doing? Obviously, our key objective is one that focuses on ensuring that micro, small, and medium enterprises can be put in a situation where they become more resilient. And this means that we are ensuring that all businesses are not only aware of what is confronting them, but also very much aware of the implications that this is posing for all of them. And as an organization, a lot of what we do, whether it's work along the value chains or indeed it's work towards supporting trade and investment support institutions, or indeed work that is supporting South-South investment, all these remain relevant, maybe even more so in the current situation than it has been before. So from our perspective, what we are saying is that we are doubling our efforts to make sure that, you know, countries are very much aware that ITC still remains with them as a partner that can support this process to make sure that the businesses are sustained, because there's no option for us. We have to sustain the businesses as much as we can, but more importantly, as I said earlier on, is to grow these businesses. So we are putting at the disposal of the countries all the tools, all the other pieces of work that we have been doing as we have done in the past. In many respects, what has happened in the last 6 months is perhaps to change the modality of delivery from, you know, a one-on-one or a direct interaction to see what could be done in the current context because of the constraints on travel, to do what we still can do delivering through the digital channel. This is a bit of what we have done. So in respect to that, we have continued to support countries on the investment initiatives at the national, the regional, and indeed for Africa at the continental level in the light of the upcoming Continental Free Trade Area. At the multilateral level, we have also been undertaking particular activities. And quick examples of that before I come to a close is the South-South investment, the 2 South-South investment projects that we have, where DFID has funded projects supporting investment from India into East Africa, as we have a similar initiative supporting investment from China into East Africa, but with a bit of an expansion in terms of the countries that have been included. We continue to do work on repositioning of countries in the context of the strategies that they are working on. And here we have a very clear example from Myanmar. We continue to provide the advisory services and the hand-holding, because when you're talking about investment, I think what is important to note from our experience in relation to the specific projects I've made reference to, it is very clear that it is a process that can be long in terms of maturity of that objective. It is a process that needs a lot of hand-holding, which we have been able to do, I think, in the current circumstances. Shifting the business-to-business engagement to do this online has been a very good learning experience and an opportunity for us. We think this is something we can build on in the future. And of course, the work on the policy side remains important. And here we have been supporting the capacity building on ensuring that the policymakers and indeed the negotiators have a better understanding of the broader investment issues. And we are doing this together with the German Development Institute. Key in all this is that all our interventions are sustainable. And here is where it becomes critical that our support towards trade and investment institutions remains a very key part of what we are doing. And here is, again, an issue that we continue to ensure that we are not only providing the solutions in the current context, but also ensuring that we are developing very strategic partners in this regard. And WAIPA is one of those entities that we are working closely with to see how we can collaborate in terms of not only sharing the experiences, but drawing on each other's expertise to do what is potentially could put us in a place where we are better supporting these institutions, but subsequently it is support to the micro, small and medium enterprises. We have to take all these into account and ensure that we meet or we work towards meeting the commitment we have all made towards the Sustainable Development Goals, because that is really our objective. It's challenging. We may not meet the current deadline, but it is a must that we still continue moving in that direction and ensure that we don't undermine any gains that we have made up to this point. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. You raise a number of very important points, each of which I think could lead into a discussion of its own. I want to come back later in the conversation to one of the first points you made about remaining relevant in the situation as the community of international organizations and donors. You've given some examples from ITC. I want to talk later in the conversation and hear from everybody about how is the international community responding? Is it fast enough to help the 60% of companies that say they're in serious trouble, or the 21% that think that they might go out of business before the end of the year, because we need a quick response to be able to have an impact there. So I definitely want to come back to that. You also talked about policies to support companies now through the stimulus packages or creating an enabling environment. I think that that's a very nice segue to hear from Sandra D'Amico from HR Inc., who is the founder and managing director of an established, of a firm operating in Cambodia, but it's also an HR firm. So it's in constant contact with thousands of other companies, and I imagine must have a lot of insights to how they are responding to the pandemic and whether the government in Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, wherever you operate, is adapting, if they're creating this enabling environment, if they're providing stimulus, if they're temporarily waiving fees or fast-tracking permits, as was the case in Myanmar. So yeah, what are you hearing from your clients, and what are you experiencing yourself in terms of the crisis? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and thank you for having me on the panel here. It's really great to hear everybody's context. I think I will start by saying that each country is really quite unique. And so it's really, really important to be up to date with what's happening on the ground. And I think that things change so quickly, and I'm based in Cambodia. This is where I have been right throughout the crisis. And moment to moment, hour to hour, things can change very, very quickly. And because of this, it's really important that governments and private sector are able to adapt. And I think flexibility, to me, in being able to respond to what is happening within the economy has been what has really shone for me in terms of working with the government in Cambodia. And I think for all governments, this is really important. If you are not able to quickly respond to the needs of the economy, respond and get feedback from private sector, and you don't have those mechanisms to engage with private sector and get feedback and know what's happening in an industry, then it's much more difficult to act and to do something. So, for example, through the engagement of the garment sector with the government, we were able to set up special repayment schemes for all garment factory and tourism workers for loans that they had taken out from the bank, because all of a sudden the people weren't having an income, businesses were closed, jobs were lost, and people had loans that they had to repay. And the government came up with solutions to that. We can't let the financial system crash. We can't let people not repay their loans. So how can we make this possible for people to repay loans? So the government mandated how we repay our loans so that it could give people some breathing space over a particular time. I think those kind of initiatives can only be done when private sector and government are really engaging very closely together to stop an economic pandemic of everything crashing. I think it's been really important. We talk about the health impact, but we have economic crisis in all the LDC countries as well. And I think we should understand that to get things going away is not to fix COVID, it's to restart our economies and keep our economies going as best as we possibly can. And so having governments work with neighboring governments to allow movement of goods and service, to allow trade in a safe way to continue to happen is really, really important. And I think what if I take Cambodia as an example, where maybe 80% of your vegetables is imported and your pork as well from neighboring countries, Thailand and Vietnam, if you're not having those strong relationships with your neighboring countries to be able to continue to facilitate the movement of goods and services, then you just come to a complete stop. And I think here we've seen some really, really terrific work on the Cambodian government to ensure those dialogues with the neighboring governments is happening so that trade can continue to go. As in all the countries, for countries like Laos and Cambodia, you're totally dependent on regional travel for tourism. People don't fly directly to Cambodia, they fly to regional countries, Thailand and Vietnam. So our tourism sector just completely just closed down in almost an instant. And what you've had to do is really recreate your tourism sector by recreating internal movement and internal tourism. And so by having what we've seen, a lot of the mayors of different towns and different provinces have been having news briefings to talk about what are the jobs in their province, what are the opportunities for travel, what are the opportunities for different things. So you start creating this internal movement of people so that you can keep your internal economy still going. In Cambodia, we had the cancellation of our New Year holiday, and that New Year holiday was pushed out because we didn't want people traveling during the peak of the COVID. We are now going to have that New Year holiday, particularly to restart their economy and get people to have a good holiday and to help people to restart their businesses and do things. So it's really simple, but it's significant in terms of what it means to create internal economies that can sustain themselves. What we've seen is a rapid uptake of e-commerce and doing things online. I think I can see that the private sector has really struggled to work from home in many cases. It was all of a sudden, one day you were in the office, the next day you were all of a sudden working from home, having kids, having pressure of family at home didn't allow for people to be very productive. So it was quite a difficult adjustment for private sector. But we have seen on the government side with government services and how to address particular issues that the government has been able to be very quick to establish e-commerce portals, e-commerce processes to really facilitate what is needed for private sector. I think one of the things that stands out for me most as an investor is that Cambodia has this incredibly strong engagement with the public and the private sector. We have technical working groups that deal with particular issues that are thematic, some on tax, some on labor laws. And these working groups have been able to work directly with ministers to be able to keep the government informed of what's happening in our sectors, how many people are losing jobs, what we need to do. So it's really important for government and private sector during this time to have a very, very close engagement. I would like to really support the importance of the SME sector during this time. I think when we look at sectors that are opening up and where there are real opportunities now, agriculture is one of them, where a lot of LDC countries can reinvent their agricultural supply chains, modernize how they do agriculture, and governments can have a really big impact in supporting the rural businesses to modernize during this time and to build sustainable food sources and improve your internal supply of fresh foods and vegetables. So agriculture is a big sector that can absorb people who have lost jobs. But unfortunately, the matching mechanisms to tell young people, hey, look, you've lost your job, why don't you go work in agriculture for a while, is the labor market linkages are not there. So people are not always able to find jobs that are available. So there's a need for facilitating the labor market dynamics that happen. And I think we haven't been able to do a great job of that, but certainly we're all conscious that there are opportunities that can absorb people from the manufacturing sector and tourism sector, even if it's temporary, but those temporary jobs will allow people to earn incomes, pay their loans, pay their rent, pay their lights and water. So those are some of the things that I would like to share from a Cambodia perspective that have been very successful in being able to manage the crisis. And I think that I will answer any other questions a little bit later on.
Okay, great, thanks. You gave us a lot to think about there. I found it particularly interesting to hear you say that the government responded faster than the private sector. You don't hear that every day, right? So it's kind of encouraging, right? Of course, the private sector, you know, if their market disappears and they're operating at a loss, they have to stop. The government has the advantage of being able to operate at deficit or get support internationally. So that's a remarkable remarkable phenomenon. And I'm glad to hear that now across multiple countries from our panelists today, that there's so much strong public-private cooperation. This is what has been advised for forever, and many international organizations are in the practice of trying to bring the public and private together, but the crisis has really done it in a way that maybe hasn't happened before. And so perhaps this is one of those good things that's going to come out of this, that hopefully is part of the new normal, right? That people continue to collaborate deeply. I can see we're running a bit behind schedule, so I'd like to hear from Mr. Touré about what's happening in Mali. So our conversation has taken us from a high level to a lower level, starting off with policies and global trends, and we're now hearing about what's happening from HR Inc. at the company level. It would be great to hear from Mr. Touré what's happening in Mali at an IPA level. How are you responding to the pandemic? All these factors that we've talked about today, are they playing out in Mali and the neighboring countries? So how are you weathering this, and how do you see the new normal emerging afterwards?
Okay, thank you very much. And also I would like to thank EIF and WAIPA to give this opportunity to share what we are seeing in Mali about COVID-19. API Mali is the national entity in charge of promoting Mali destination as good for investors. For this pandemic, we conduct an aftercare study to see how companies are operating in Mali were affected by the pandemic. We were able to highlight many issues they share with us. First is due to the border were being closed, the exportation of product decreased significantly. This had a big impact on the entire value chain of the product. For example, mango. Mali is one of the key producers of mango in West Africa. This year campaign will be impacted by this issue, and we are expecting to see 40% of decrease of the exportation. So this is really important for us. Some projects have stalled because they were not able to receive funds that were expected. Many of the company we talk with said to us that they were supposed to receive some finance between March and June, but until now they are waiting because borders are closed and the partners are waiting to see how things are going. Also, one of the speakers talked about before me, the commodities price decrease is really impacting all the economy. In Mali case, as you may know, we are first or second producer of cotton in Africa, depending the year. And the cotton is really key in our economy because it represents 15% of GDP, and 4 million people is depending on the sector. So when the price decrease, it really impacts all the economy performance. But this is the bad side of the COVID-19. But as everything in the life, there is good side also. This pandemic as API lead us to really accelerate our digitalization agenda. We are going to launch the e-registration program to allow companies to register quickly and from their home. So this is a good move for API Mali. We also take the step to rather focusing on FDI attraction. We choose to focus more on our aftercare program and developing stronger relationship with our national investors. So now they are happy to see us more often and be more closer to them. Also, the pandemic lead us to take more to emphasis on digital communication, which is more effective in terms of cost and time. We are creating more promotional content through videos. So as far as the government is concerned, due to the pandemic, they decided many measures based on the private sector organization demand. So those measures will cost more than 800 million to the US dollar to the government. So they are related to, excuse me, tax rebates for impacted companies, additional funds for private sector guarantee fund. Also, sorry, the government is trying to put more cash into the economy through clearance of all the domestic debt recorded by end of 2019, and also paying all the invoices due for 2020 to the companies. So paying internal debt is very important for all national companies because it's a question of treasury. So those measures aim to reduce the financial burden and the cash requirement of the companies affected by the COVID-19. So my last word will be to say, sorry, despite additional challenges we are facing due to this pandemic.
Mr. Touré, you've frozen on your last point. If you can hear me, okay. Mr. Touré,
we must continue to promote Mali as a destination. It's the same take that should be from now. Excuse me? Hello? You hear me?
We can hear you now. We lost you for a second, but I think we got the main points.
Okay.
Just a brief moment at the end.
Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I was just saying that we are going to reinforce our aftercare service. Yes. Perfect.
Yeah, I think I see the whole conversation this morning flowing to a certain endpoint where we have a list of actionable things that investment promotion agencies can take from this. As I understand, the majority of our participants today are investment promotion agencies. I think you probably came wanting to know, what do I do now, right? How do I deal with the pandemic? So if I can try to summarize some of the key actionable points for Ipas, and then I'd like to throw it open to the panel for any other items to finish off that list. Looking at the time, I think that's probably all we've got time for before we move into the next phase of the webinar. So the list that I've heard is, of course, aftercare as a focus of your activities as an investment promotion agency. Be sure you hang on to what you have. Those companies are going to be the ones that are reinvesting later. It's much easier than going out trying to get new companies in general terms, and especially now. For the many IPAs that are not just promoters, but also regulators or administrators of government procedures, now's the time to digitalize processes. So take advantage of the need and get the support from the government needed to move processes online. and develop skills internally that are needed for the new kind of promotion. Mr. Touré, you talked about making promotional videos now. This is something that a lot of IPAs don't have that much experience with. When you begin trying to do this, you realize it's a lot harder than it seems, right? There's the content, the substance of the message is often in need of a lot of refinement to be presented from a private sector angle with lots of facts and figures that are persuasive in a way that compares the country to other competing locations so that you can present yourself as the best option, not just as another option. So that takes certain skills that IPAs need to develop. And also they need to be fulfilling the role of policy advocate, which is something that IPAs have always done, have always needed to do. But now we have very specific things. Over the last few speakers, we've heard a number of policies implemented by governments, from the loan repayment scheme, the tax rebates, negotiating with neighboring countries to find solutions to trade restrictions. And some of these things are a matter of policy. Some of them are a matter of logistics that require government investment. When border trade means that you have to move from one truck to another, or transfer of goods is happening by hand instead of by pallet or containers. These are things that the government and their partners in the donor community can support to allow the governments to be able to say it's okay to transfer goods and let trade keep flowing. So those were some great points that I think are actionable for our audience. Would the panel like to add anything else to that list before we move into the next phase of the webinar?
Can I add something? Carlos, if you allow me.
Please.
I think, of course, when you talk about the regional dimension, it's negotiating with regional partners on the trade front is important, but also deepening engagement with regional partners to promote intra-regional investment. I think, something that we should put additional emphasis on, given the fact that these are the countries, in neighboring countries, they understand the situation better. They have cultural similarities, and they also, tend to have a similar sort of, conditions. So therefore, I think that angle should be emphasized. The other dimension that I wanted us to think through is the dimension of international cooperation. Particularly, it is vital for international cooperation, because LDCs alone will not be able to resolve all of these problems. And IPAs alone, it will be impossible for them. Government alone, it will be impossible for them. Private sector alone, it will be impossible for them. So the idea of partnership, idea of international cooperation would be critical. And this is where I just want to make a point, if you allow me. Utilizing the overarching framework of SDG, Sustainable Goals 17.5, which talks about investment promotion, creating investment promotion regimes for LDCs, and kind of, facilitating that kind of regime. And also, it doesn't stop at creating the regime, but also equipping them with necessary tools, resources, and technology to be able to attract and retain investment. I think this is a fundamental area where a proposal is being circulated. I think it's being discussed, particularly emanating from the Columbia University, that is the center that is working on sustainable development goals. They have actually come up with an idea. Wait, this was an old idea, but something for us to think through. Why not we establish a dedicated FDI facility at the global level in order to implement SDG 17.5 and even go beyond that. Particularly at the time of crisis like this has become even more relevant. I think this is something that is worth discussing. For example, we have Aid for Trade initiative for the trade side of it, right? And EIF is one of those agencies. Itc is another agency which provides aid for trade support to the developing countries, and we provide to LDCs in particular. What about aid for trade and investment initiative, building on the existing successful initiative, or creating a standalone aid for investment initiative where development partner, provide resources, contribute resources, and it has to be a well-endowed one. Something that was actually discussed also at the G20 level, and the communique of G20 recognizes the fact that they don't want to spare any effort in order to actually they've said that it's spare no effort whatsoever to be able to revive the global economy. That's in that same spirit, I think it would be critical to think big actually, and think of this modality of international cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a big idea you've left us with. The idea that it's not just about surviving this bump in the road, but rethinking the world in a way that we haven't done in 75 years, right? And looking for what are the big answers to the future. So I think that's a great note on which to end this phase of our discussion. So thank you very much to all the panelists. As I said, we have a special guest speaker. We have the Undersecretary of State at the Ministry of Commerce in Cambodia who was able to join us. And so we wanted to share a little bit what's happening in Cambodia, bring these thoughts together about government and private sector. And we'll hear a few minutes from Minister Samheng, and then we'll go into the Q&A portion of this. I can see that a few questions have been submitted. If you want to submit, now's the time, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom to add more questions. And when we move into that phase, I will call on those of you who submitted questions to ask it yourself if you'd like. If you prefer not to, you can remain silent and I'll ask it for you. But yes, now please, Undersecretary Samheng.
Thank you for having me here today, and I am actually very appreciative of WAIPA and especially the EIF, and especially Dr. Ratnakar himself for always supporting Cambodia. And I think a lot of the success that we have had has a lot to do with how much support we get from the EIF itself as well. So thank you for that. I think I am very happy with what Ms. Sandra D'Amico had mentioned about Cambodia. I think the key to engaging in this difficult time has a lot to do with adaptability. I think being able to adapt with the current or constant changes that continue to happen, continue to occur as we face this pandemic is very crucial. Some of the many things that the Cambodian government has done so far, I think, has proven to be relatively beneficial in easing the burden of the private sector in their ability to handle the after effect of the pandemic itself. And I think Sandra has already mentioned as well in terms of how we are meeting up with the private sector, especially the labor industry, in terms of addressing the issues of labor and how each of the labor force itself has to deal with daily spending, loan repayment, and taxation and all that. So this is why I think the government has been pushing quite hard in terms of decreasing interest rates, in terms of extending repayment schemes, in terms of decreasing the interest rate on working capitals. So all of these has been proven to be quite beneficial, I think, in terms of helping the public in dealing with the effect of the pandemic itself. What we see as well, I think Sandra has also mentioned a bit on the how dependent Cambodia is on the tourism industry. And it is completely true in the idea that Cambodia, the tourism industry in Cambodia in general completely came to a stop. What happened during the peak of the pandemic itself, a city as vibrant and as heavily dependent on tourism as Siem Reap had no one there, and it was completely quiet, and it became very heavy on the people over there, and especially the hotel industry, the F&B industries. You see so many closures of the hotels itself. So I think recently the government has also held a meeting on how to jumpstart back the tourism industry. And I think one of the key issues here is that we are focusing on creating a better opportunity for domestic travel. And I think this is something that we have seen improved quite a bit. What we learned is that now that the international travel, there's a lot of burden, there's a lot of issues on how to get from one point to another. Locally, people are still very active. They still want to get from place to place. They still want to enjoy some leisure activities. And this has proven to be something that is beneficial in terms of how to reignite the tourism industry. And what we learned is that in cities like Kampot, Kaip, Siem Reap, all of these tourist attraction has proven that domestically people are beginning to travel again. And this has given the opportunity for hotels to reopen, and you see booking to start becoming a thing again. So I think these are some of the ways that we have been able to learn to adapt. I think reigniting domestic trade, I heard Dr. Ratnakar mention about the regional, intra-regional investment. I think this is something that we could probably look into. Sandra has also mentioned as well that Cambodia has continued to have dialogue with our neighbors quite a bit, especially with Vietnam and Thailand, where we depend quite a bit on the imports of of food products. And this has proven to be very beneficial as well. And I think we really need to start, I think governments are starting to understand that depending more closer to where your borders are, helping to establish better understanding, better cooperation with the friends, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the neighbors that are closer to us is something that is very crucial. And I think intra-regional investment with regional blocks is something that we should be focusing on pushing. I heard Dr. Ratnakar mention something about aid for investment. I think this is a very, very attractive term, and I hope that you are able to push something like that forward, because something aids that pushes further investment, especially within the region, is going to help quite a bit in terms of how we can address the issues that the private sector is currently facing. And I'm so happy with the way that we have been able to share some of the information that is currently happening all around the world. And some of these issues, I think we could use to learn on how to apply on what we have to do here. And I recognize that you have a schedule that you have to go by, so I probably won't take much more of your time. But I do hope to emphasize that Cambodia is learning as we go. I think at this time there's just no way to be completely certain of what to do. But I think the one thing that we are able to do is to learn to adapt with the current development of how the pandemic is affecting our world. And I think this new normal has proven that Cambodia is relatively resilient and that we are able to adapt a bit more. We push stimulus package. We are creating funds to help assist the poor. So I think these are some of the ways that we are able to do it. Even from the establishment, I think from the help of the EIF, the e-commerce strategy, the goal for eCam to pushing more people onto the e-commerce platform. I think the Ministry of Finance has established the Khmer Entrepreneur, where they provide information for registration online and how to create better information transfer for new entrepreneurs. And we have also established something called a CAM-DX, a process where it is supposed to make it easier for company to register and gain licensing. It's a one-stop shop in order to make registration work a lot faster. So these are all of the initiatives that we have learned to use to adapt with the current situation. And I do hope that if you do have more questions or you need clarification on some of these items, I'm more than happy to share it with you. But I think for now, this is what I hope to share. And I hope that what we are able to talk today, and especially what I've learned today from so many great speakers here, is that we are, during a time this difficult, I think constant development, constant adaptability, and constant ability to change in accordance to what is happening is very crucial. And I'd like to thanks again for having me here, and I hope to answer a question, I guess maybe through the chat or something as we go along. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that's a great picture, tying together in one country everything we've talked about today. So I'm grateful for that contribution. Thank you. And yes, I should mention that, and I see some of you have made use of it already. It's also possible through Zoom to pose questions directly to individual speakers. And I see some of you have done that. So great, you can keep doing that. As a group, we'll probably only have time for maybe three questions here at the end. So please do make full use of that. Now I'd like to ask if she's willing, Camila Vicaria Angel from ProColombia, the Trade and Investment Promotion Agency of Colombia, had a number of questions. Would you care to ask the ones that you had about the, say, e-commerce incentives and nearshoring sectors? You can just unmute yourself and ask it. And if you choose not to, I can ask it for you. Excuse me, Camilo, not Camila. I apologize.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, I would like to ask, some of the panelists mentioned that the global value chains were readjusting. So I would like to know which sector are particularly potential for these nearshoring strategies, or these potential sector that could be most interesting for tapping into the readjustments of supply chains. And regarding incentives, we have seen that some cities are offering very attractive investment packages, but also in some countries there are discussions that in these times resources are very needed. So what would be the advice of the panelists? Finally, I would like to know what is the role of e-commerce for investment opportunities in this disruption of global value chains. I think particularly that e-commerce is a very potential tool for SMEs. So it would be good to know what would be particularly the role of e-commerce. And regarding GSP schemes, I would like to know what would be the role of these schemes during the pandemic and post-COVID. Finally, it would be interesting to hear what is the role of the minimis trade in South-South FTAs, the trade that is particularly impacting very products that are not very much of value, so that can particularly help SMEs. And finally, or fifth, during these uncertain times, we normally see that capital flow tend to protect themselves in developed markets. So how can we in investment promotion agencies help to convey the trust to investors that more risky markets like LDCs or emerging markets are attractive during these times and post-COVID times? And final question, what would be the role of distressed investment to ensure that the businesses that need it the most get the finance that they need? So these companies that are going into shortages of cash flows and of resources that need investment to scale up their operations, how we as Ipas could also play a role in making the most of these opportunities and ensuring that the resources are being allocated to the ones that need it the most. Thank you.
Thank you. You had quite a lot of questions, as I think we all do. So let me ask the panelists to maybe focus on maybe the first three. So we had mention of e-commerce. What's the role of e-commerce in getting out of the pandemic? Is there a role for government in supporting that? Incentives have been mentioned a few times today. Have we found effective incentives? I know you mentioned some for green parks and the green economy, and then nearshoring opportunities with the need to diversify geographically. So nearshoring, e-commerce incentives. Do you have any thoughts on those three? And this is open to any panelist.
Can I quickly jump in here to respond to one particular question, relating to e-commerce, because I'm the culprit for bringing that issue in the beginning. So I think in terms of providing support to e-commerce, there's already a kind of a modality in place as far as LDCs are concerned. So EIF, through EIF support, we have conducted what is known as e-trade readiness assessment, as a result of which 3 countries have already put in place e-commerce strategies, right? And these strategies are essentially for helping the private firms, including foreign ones, to take advantage of the e-commerce ecosystem that's facilitated through government intervention. So when you are creating the ecosystem, it talks about constraint, it talks about opportunities, it talks about the finances, it talks about the investment potential and everything, right? So that's where I think government, those governments that have not created e-commerce ecosystem, for example, Senegal has already done it and others may not have. I think it's the time to create that kind of ecosystem. The second aspect which is important in order to bring the startups on e-commerce platform, it is important to follow the kind of e-registration modality that is successfully being applied in countries such as Benin. Then it might be important to provide fiscal incentive, tax break or some kind of incentive in order to attract investment in this sector. Not only the foreign investment, but also domestic private investment, and companies that are already operating in Asia, for example. I know that companies such as Alibaba have now moved to other countries in the region as well. Although not through a greenfield investment modality, but through a takeover modality, but they have a very good presence in South Asia and Southeast Asia, and which is being facilitated because of the kind of investment climate or e-commerce ecosystem that exists there. But there's a more that needs to be done. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry if anybody else has something else to add to that. That would be great. But maybe when you do, if I could ask you to think about the question of domestic direct investment and foreign direct investment. We've talked about both today. Usually when we've talked about SMEs, I think we've talked about domestic essentially. And we've also, now in your comments, Dr. Adhikari, mentioned how FDI is distinguished a little bit in some of those cases. Do we need to draw a distinction in our approach? How does the politics play into it when we're trying to help companies survive? We're paying attention to one group or another. Have you seen any difference in the way we approach the two groups?
I had wanted to come in, but on another issue, but maybe I can leave the opportunity for others to come. There was a specific question related to value chain repositioning, but maybe I can come in a bit later.
No, please, and I'm sorry, I was trying to add a lens to the questions posed by Camilo. So as you think about value chain repositioning, is there a difference between FDI and DDI? Please, Ms. Tembo.
No, I wasn't going to respond to this specific question. I was, perhaps I would leave it more with my colleagues who are better positioned to respond.
Bostjan, you look like you were going to say something.
Actually, my idea is that, of course, there are distinctions between the foreign and let's say local investments. But if we will not work together, you know, as you mentioned, it will not work, because these forward and backward linkages are very important. And I guess the governments would need to strengthen the local existing businesses, especially the SMEs or SMEs. Of course, why? Because then they will be able to support the investors in the country, and they will be able to attract later on new investments as well. And what I would like to say, there was a question about incentives. I guess governments will more than ever be cautious what kind of incentives they will give. They would try to make we always hear this green recovery, so coming back green. So I guess the important sectors that we didn't mention much today about SDGs, but I guess the sectors that are supported by SDGs will come in the forefront naturally. And this is also where the governments, as far as we see now, are trying to put the incentives, so to attract investments into these kind of sectors. And this is, I guess, the added value from the governments, and I'm sure the investors as well see this as a great contribution. And we heard, I was very happy to hear, especially from Cambodia case, that government really stepped forward and let's say insisted the investors, and as well, of course, let's say the investment promotion agency was very active, and Mali as well said, and what we believe is cooperation, collaboration. And we will all need to work hand in hand together to be able to attract the appropriate investments. And what I would also like to stress, this is the last point that I would like to make, is regional cooperation. So when speaking about nearshoring, reshoring, so the regions will need to work hand in hand. There will be no competition, but rather cooperation. So people will need to overcome this understanding of being competitors. So regions showing to the, let's say, foreign investors that they are stable, that they work together, they create some certain, let's say, rules, will be more than ever needed. And of course, intra-regional investments will become very important. So I will stop here because of the time. Somebody else can add something.
That idea of needing to cooperate more, integrate more, comes at a time where we had been really experiencing the reverse globally, right? More discussion about separating from each other and being less integrated and reclaiming sovereignty as a sort of political slogan. How do you see those two coming together? I mean, if the pandemic is proving that we need to work together, what does the other side of this look like? Can we get to this point of cooperation that Bostjan described, or the intra-regional cooperation that Undersecretary Samheg described? Can we do this, and what's the role of Ipas or international organizations in making that happen?
If I may,
Please.
Come in on that perhaps, and maybe one or 2 points responding to the earlier questions. Maybe briefly to start with that, on the repositioning of sectors, what we have seen from the work that we have done and the analysis, clearly a shift in particular on the apparel and textile industries, sectors, and largely because these were the same entities that were also confronted with cancellations of orders that had been pre-existing, but because of the pandemic, this was, a different situation that warranted a quick rethink. And we saw a number of these, particularly in West Africa, repositioning themselves to produce more of the PPEs requirements in the context of more masks, more, health related products. And within that they are also shifting their supply to look more internally, if I may use that word very loosely, more to supply Africa, but very clear to us that the demand that is there is not one that can be met by those that are producing within the African context, which links slightly, I think, to the question that you posed right now. how critical is it that countries continue to look at the multilateral aspect of things. It remains, for me, it remains important that there is that engagement at the multilateral level. Countries cannot survive as islands, neither can regions. There's so much interdependency, as we have seen from the current context, and that interdependency is one that needs to be managed, absolutely, but it is one that also can yield positive results in the long term. So I don't think that the move towards the multilateral side of things should be one that should be ignored by the different countries. And we as international entities, we continue to work with them in that spirit. I wanted to also indicate that I think in looking at the situation that we are confronted with now, we have to look at it from the short-term perspective. What is the immediate need? And we have to seem to be responding to those needs that have been identified by entities at this point in time. Even in relation to the investment side, what is it that can be done now? And what is it that can be done in the medium to long term? It's very clear, I think, the medium to long term, we have to be very well positioned to making sure that the investment opportunities are ones that are not only enhanced, but that are ones that are actually realized. And the steps towards that are ones that we have to work towards supporting and make sure that this happens, whether it's at the regional level or indeed at the multilateral level. The final point I would want to make is that, yes, countries may want to move in the direction of providing incentives, but at this particular point in time, issues of sustainability should also be ones that are taken into account. How sustainable is what is going to be provided as incentives? Because you do not want entities to be given that door and then within a few months, because governments have other needs, they're trying to withdraw what was provided, which was the basis of making a particular investment in any country.
Incentives, which comes up in just about every forum, and I'm glad you clarified that. I'm sorry, Dr. Adhikari, I think you had something to say.
Right. Just quickly to wrap up the discussion on this, multilateral cooperation, because you raised this, schizophrenia as to whether countries are collaborating or they are distancing themselves. Just want to make two quick points, very quick. One is that the free movement of goods, services, people, investment, ideas, and technology can help help these countries to recover quicker or swifter, and the opposite can be equally true. So, this is something that policymakers need to keep in mind. And this is clearly a case for cooperation, collaboration, engagement, rather than distancing from each other. So, and that's where the multilateral collaboration becomes even more critical. The other aspect where I mentioned initially about the regional dimension, and I'm glad that Bostjan also picked up that dimension. Just want to give you an example of a regional cooperation. So within ASEAN region, where we have Cambodia, Laos, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and other countries, they have issued a joint declaration to tackle the health-related crisis and economic crisis simultaneously. And similarly, in East Africa community also they have done so. South Asia Association of Regional Cooperation, they have also shown some kind of solidarity, but that didn't move that far in terms of really solidifying the collaboration on the economic front. But then there are successful examples of why this is happening, successful examples of where this is happening, and then that would also create a building block for strengthened cooperation and collaboration at the multilateral level. Thank you.
You know, I'd like very much to hear from Ms. D'Amico on the business side about whether she sees the Federation of Businesses in Cambodia warming to this sort of idea of cooperation interregional. And on the other side, Undersecretary Samheng, how is the government bringing this message? Is it bringing this message to the business community? And are you finding consensus about how to move forward on these issues of cooperation and multilateralism? And Mr. Touré, I'd also be interested in hearing about your experience in Mali as well, representing the government in those sorts of public-private dialogues. I think this may be all we have time for. We've gone over, and I see that we've kept most of our audience, so I know everybody's very interested, and there's always 100 more questions to ask, but so we can hear from all the panelists one last time if the three of you have some thoughts on actual movement towards consensus for cooperation, and whether there are challenges that you would alert the audience to, and how to help them overcome those to get to a point where we can work together to find solutions.
So I will go first very quickly with some thoughts there. I think as an investor, when you're looking at investing in a country, it's really important that we have confidence in the government and the policies that governments are providing in terms of the economic environment in which we are working. I don't think incentives are always needed, because it's a whole ecosystem of what you need to bring investors to your country. It's not only give me incentives and those incentives might go away. There's a lot more than that. And I think that there was a question earlier on in the discussion about we don't have the skills there's always this mismatch of you don't have something to offer an investor. I think that investors are prepared to invest when there's an ecosystem that is attractive. They can deal with skills challenges because companies train people. They can deal with training up a workforce as long as they know there is a workforce. So I think that it's really important to understand that an investor looks at more than just what is an incentive, and you have to have an offering as a country to say this is what we can give, this is where we are going. I think in countries like Cambodia, and here I can really speak from experience, where you have strong private sector government working groups. It's and there's always a dialogue and adjustment to what is happening in the economy, in the environment, to keep pushing both parties to do a better job. Employers need to be better employers, and governments need to be good governments, and make sure that things are transparent, things are clear, and they're not just going to change with a flip of a switch. So multilateral agencies are very important, and I think you will find that private sector is perhaps maybe a little bit more cautious, because I speak recently, we've started talking about how you get financing for social security funds and things like that, with an employer and a trade union initiative where Cambodia has been earmarked as a priority country. And I think here as private sector, we often look at multilateral agencies and go, well, where's the sustainability in this plan that you have for us? I understand that you want to have social security floors, and I understand that you want to have all these great things that you are going to finance, but at the end of the day, somebody has to continue, right, to pay for a system or pay for something. So private sector is a lot more business-like when it comes to looking at what are multilaterals offering, and and for us, we very much always come back to this sustainability question. To draw on the expertise and the capacity building and the technical ability that multilaterals have is really important. Whether it's the agriculture sector, whether it's manufacturing, you really need that because you learn so much and you gain so much for the country and the people in that. When it comes to financing, there needs to be more innovative financing, and I'm using a word here, but I'm not going to have an example to go with it. But the point is that you can give wage subsidies, but that can only last for so long. You can support giving, addressing a particular issue for a short time, but at the end of the day, the government has to either continue with that sort of policy that is now started, and is that sustainable for the government? So I think it's really important that sustainability is looked at when it comes to engaging with multilaterals, to make sure that countries can continue to do what you set out to do in the beginning. So I will stop there and hand over to Excellency Samheng to speak further. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos, for the question, and I thank Sandra as well for always very clear and precise explanation. I think the question that was directed at me has more to do with the cross-border trades and investment aspects. I think Cambodia in general, I think for the last few months, we had been so focused on reigniting or at least protecting the domestic market that we have only started to think about how we would want to handle the cross-border trades, especially the immediate borders that we have with especially Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. But I think one of the, as I think Dr. Ratnakar had mentioned as well, I think the joint declaration that we had with our bordering countries on the health issue is a great start in addressing some of the precaution that we have to take in terms of addressing these issues. And what I believe is that during these talks, we actually had a few informal discussion as well, and including myself, I had a few informal discussion with my neighboring colleagues about how we should begin to study a way of how to reopen the borders in a more productive, well-mannered, and attractive for further investment from the region. These are some talks that I believe will require a bit more reflection on. I think that most of the country in the region is still much focused on the domestic issues that is currently happening. I think what Sandra had mentioned about addressing the issues of unemployment, addressing the issue of repositioning the workforce into a different sector, the issue of making sure that repayment works out is a bit more of a pressing issue for the government currently. But I do believe that I think the next pressing items that will be on the table for discussion is on cross-border trade, especially the immediate trade. And I think the ASEAN bloc is working together now in terms of informal talks on establishing a working procedures on how we could reestablish or reopen the borders in a more productive manner. I do hope that was able to answer your question, and I'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I think the last few have painted a picture of short, medium, and long-term measures that IPAs and their governments and their partners in the private sector may be taking to come out of this stronger than when we went into the pandemic. So I think it would be great if we ended with a word from Mr. Touré about how, as an IPA, you see these short, medium, long-term goals and how other IPAs in the audience can help to realize them.
Yes. Yes.
Did you catch the question?
Yes. Thank you again. I would like to add that we have to keep in mind that COVID is a new element which reinforces existing difficulties for LPIs and investment promotion on LCDs. So I think first, sorry? Yes, I heard the question, I think. You hear me? Connection problem.
Yes, we hear
Hello?
you. We hear you, but there's a delay, so please.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
We hear you, but there seems to be a long delay. Go ahead and make your final comment, and
Sorry.
I won't interrupt again.
Let me...
As interested as I am in hearing what Mr. Touré had to say, I suspect this may be difficult to conclude on this point in view of the technical difficulties. So maybe I'll just I'll leave it here, if that's okay. We've kept everybody longer than we said we would. I'm very happy to see that most of our audience is still there. Thank you for your questions. Big thanks to the panelists for taking the time to come and share their insights. They were very valuable. They paint a picture that I, at least for one, didn't have before I came into this workshop about what IPAs need to do now, in the medium term, the long term. And special thanks to EIF and WAIPA for hosting this. Thank you all very much. And I hope that you'll stay engaged. EIF and WAIPA, I know, are there for you. So, and I hope ITC won't mind me saying the same about ITC. So we're a community here to help each other. So let's stay in touch and solve these problems together. Thank you.
Thank you very much.